Leslie Schilling, thanks so much for being on the Compared to Who show today.
Thanks for having me back.
I am so excited to continue our conversation. Your new book comes out today, or came out this week, Feed Yourself. And woo, you went there, all the places I was hoping some Christian author would go. You go there with the data, like read the footnotes in this book, y'all. I mean, because I do, like, I always read the footnotes. I always read the footnotes. But I think there's so much skepticism that you will face. Even if you do make these steps out of diet culture, you will face pushback. So it's good to know your stuff, and it's good to have a book like Leslie's to be like, hey, why don't you read this? Let's talk about it, see what you think. But today I want to get into a conversation, and this is really where your book kind of starts, is about diet culture in the safe spaces, diet culture in places where, like for school, for example, where you're not there to nudge your, I'll tell you, personal story. I found out through the app that tells me what my daughter's assignments are. I found out that she had a biology assignment where she had to log her food for 2 days. I had no idea until that assignment was graded. And I was like, we had a conversation about that, but it's everywhere. It's a small Christian school. Like, where'd they come from? What have you observed, Leslie? Like, what are you talking about when you're talking about the infiltration of diet culture in these safe spaces?
Yeah. I think it came to a head for me when I was sitting in a sermon and a pastor brought a bunch of food to the stage and really started dichotomizing as, this is good, this is bad, and we can do better with, God on our side, and really took a diet culture message of good food, bad food, and wrapped it in a Bible verse. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there as a clinician and a Christian, having moved away from diet practices at this point. So I'm already on the non-diet intuitive eating kind of side of things. And I'm just thinking, wow, how much shame just got delivered to people who like and enjoy and eat the foods that don't fall in the righteous category. And then I started seeing it all the time, like the jokes, the examples. And then I was like, wow, diet culture, like I knew diet culture was in schools, right? And I knew all those assignments, and I experienced it myself, like being weighed in front of my class in the 6th grade, which was an awful experience. So, like we know it's in schools. We know it's in medical offices because it's the first thing you encounter when you get there after signing in. But church, in places of worship, if we believe we're fearfully and wonderfully made, why are we afraid of M&Ms? Like if we believe we're fearfully and wonderfully made, why are we questioning that God made us in different bodies? Mm-hmm. And that really kind of sealed the deal for me about like, I couldn't let it rest. I could not let it rest because that was just one of the examples. Other examples are, pastors who are like talking about their diets or promoting certain types of eating or plans or whatever to their congregation. And like this is probably taking it further than you want to take it, but I took it here in the book as like, we're not reading the room very well. Mm-hmm. Like we've got people sitting in congregations that cannot afford this privileged food list that you just said is what makes us righteous. Mm-hmm. I cannot believe for one moment that God would require something of us that isn't available to all of us. And not one thing we put on our plates or don't put on our plates, or how we engage our body in movement or don't, can separate us from the love of God. And it breaks my heart to see messages delivered in what should be the safest of places like this to land on a believer's heart that their body shape, size, or how they feed it is tied to their worthiness. And that is something we've got to get rid of that. And it happens, and it happens, I think, innocently is definitely the wrong word, but it happens because diet culture is in the safe places. So these pastors, Christian influencers, whoever, like, they grew up in diet culture too. They grew up thinking it's healthy. And then if you want to be a good steward of your body, you need to be healthy. And just let me say, like, health, as defined in our culture, is not offered to everyone. And it does not look the same to everyone. And so I think we have to be really, really careful with those messages. But, we have to really wipe diet culture from the lens in which we view the Bible. And in the book, I was really, really careful of trying not to do what I say other people do, which is taking a verse out of context to support our kind of diet culture lessons or sermons or whatever. So I, had some pastors and theologians that are actually biblical scholars, help me out. Like, I was like, I do not want to do what I say people are doing that's causing harm. And, we really dug into some of these verses that are used to harm and shame these amazing bodies, and how we've done that and how it's wrong. And it really is about, like, we are reading the Bible with a diet culture lens, and we're really going to have to wipe that away to get diet culture out of our church. And I hope and pray that my work with the theologian in this particular chapter will help do that.
Yeah, agreed. So good. There was something you said in the middle there. I just want to make sure that it's not lost. And let me kind of add a story to it. So 2 or 3 days before I got your book, I was listening to a Christian meditation app that was talking about Proverbs 23. And I just did a 2-part series on gluttony where I kind of broke down, like, the Proverbs 23, like all of the ugly ways we have turned that into the, ultimate, like, gluttony passage, which is not what it's about at all. But this Christian meditation app kept saying over and over again, like, let's make sure to stick to the outside perimeter of the grocery store. And if it comes in a package, it's not the best thing for your body. And, like, that was the message in there. And when I got your book and I read, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but just to kind of rephrase what you said just a minute ago, if it's not accessible to everyone financially, just even what's, what your local store is like. I live outside of Austin, Texas. There's no shortage of wealth around where I live. Like, got grocery stores within a stone's throw in every direction, but not everyone has that. If it's not available to everyone, how in the world could God require it? How could that be falling short of his standard? And so what seems to be mixed in there is this substituting, like, God's definition of holiness for some sort of food purity, right? Which is not, like, what? Like, that the Jews had some food purity laws, but Jesus showed Peter the blanket with all the animals to go eat. I mean, like, we're not under those laws anymore. So, like, where does this whole new set of food purity, the only pure foods are in the outside perimeter of the grocery store. Like, now I know someone is listening saying, but what about nutrition? Okay. And you do work on nutrition. Can you answer that dilemma? Someone's heart's like, ooh, but that's not nutritious. What do you know?
Well, I would say, first of all, Jesus never asked you to, like, have the most nutritious diet. Like, that's like, you don't owe it. If you feel compelled to eat more vegetables, that's fine. That's fine. If you can afford it, if you have access to it, if that sounds appealing to you, if it's not in service of diet culture, go for it.
Mm.
Nutrition is important, but it's not the most important. It's not what diet culture has told us it is, not at all. And so I think that's what we have to remember is like, what is in service to diet culture and what's not. So I really like fruit. I like to eat fruit. I tend to eat more vegetables because sometimes I find myself like not willing to cut up the fruit or prepare the fruit. So, I mean, like for me saying I really enjoy fruit, I think I'm going to prep some to eat it more. That's not in service to diet culture. That's me saying I would really like to enjoy this more. Like this is a gift. That's okay. I think it really depends on what it's really truly in service to. And we have to realize that we don't owe anybody a number on a scale. We don't owe the world health. It's actually not even achievable for our world's view of health is not achievable for everyone. There are people who have chronic diseases. There are people who have disabilities. There are people who have do not have say the able body that I have. And I think we really need to acknowledge that and not hold people to those standards. And that's all a gift. It's a privilege that we have to acknowledge, so yeah, I mean, those are things that I think we really have to hone in on them. Like, if I really want to do this nutrition goal, who is it in service to? Is it in service to self and my own well-being and maybe closeness to God? But I will say, like, you just have to you have to eat and be fed to get close to God, because you have to have the energy for that, for the presence. But we're so often restricting, right? We're so often restricting, and a restricted body does not, promote like cognition, the ability to truly be present with others. And so I think, yes, you're right. Nutrition matters, but it doesn't matter as much as diet culture told us it does. And that's where I kind of dive into the book about social determinants of health. Your zip code, how you grow up, where you grow up, what you have access to is directly related to your health. And we have not acknowledged that in the church. So when I say like, read the room, pastors, influencers, we have to read beyond what's available to us and recognize that it's not available to everybody. And so, social determinants of health, trauma, medications, is it in service to the scale? And I can promise you, if your nutrition goal is in service to the scale, it's in service to diet culture and not something higher. So, yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah, nutrition is important, but it is not the end all be all that we've made it. And listen, there are a lot of well-known physicians that have teamed up with pastors to do these programs. And I write about some of these in the book. I don't necessarily name names, but I write about these in the book, where like what we're really doing here is creating the potential for clinical eating disorders in believers, because this purity around food is called orthorexia, not righteousness.
Right. It's a false. I mean, Christy Harrison, actually, I think her definition of diet culture is, a system that worships, right? And I thought that word worship just stuck out to me, because I don't know that Christy claims to be a believer, but the word worship indicates idolatry, right? And you talk about idolatry in the book. So it's like, okay, if we are taking believers and then the church saying it's okay to worship this too on the side, it's like we're just building golden calves, like, right in the church foyer, in the church kitchen, right?
Let's get our steps, our 10,000 steps, which, side note, is not even based on science. It's just like that sounded good. Let's so it's so like let's do, and if you're into that, that's fine. But like, really think about who and what is this in service to? And then, or we're not able to enjoy a meal out with friends because we don't know calorie numbers, which are also incorrect, plus or minus 20% allowed by the law. So like we're like these exercises in futility to really serve diet culture. And it doesn't get us closer to loving God or loving our neighbors. And then this gluttony thing that you were talking about too, like gluttony is like, I've had so many clients come into my office that are like, I have achieved a lot of things in my life. I am a successful person, but if I could just get a hold of my gluttony. And they've learned it in church that their desire to eat food, which is God-given, is wrong. And it is not. It is not. But we've used examples of gluttony as the definition of gluttony, and we've harmed people. And what I've found in my own practice, and I have never met a glutton in 20 plus years of my own practice, never, ever, ever, even though people think that they are, what I've encountered is someone who's been so restricted and shamed in diet culture that honors their hunger and feels ashamed for it when they've been and experienced prolonged restriction in order to feel pure or righteousness, which and that is so harmful. But when we have the conversation about, I don't think gluttony is what's going on here. I think restriction of your very wise and divine body is what's going on here. And your incredibly wise body makes you want to eat more than what might be comfortable because it hasn't been fed for so long. That is not gluttony. And I want to say, like, the definitions that we throw out from sermons and Christian influencers about gluttony are so harmful. Gluttony is a heart posture. It is not how you eat.
Amen.
It is not the food on your plate. It is not the size of your body. And pastors, somebody sent me a message this past week about, like, my pastor just said by looking at someone who lives in a larger body that they must suffer from gluttony. I'm like, that is fat phobia and anti-fat bias running rampant in the church, and that is so incredibly wrong and harmful. But gluttony, we have to remember, is a heart posture. It is more about your heart and how you act towards others than it is how we eat and our bodies. And that's just one of the many examples of how we've like used verses in the Bible to serve diet culture. Yeah.
Agree 100%. I mean, I went through every single verse that mentioned gluttony or gluttonous or glutton in a 2-part episode, and was like, there's no way you can say Jesus was talking about food with any kind, and it's not even listed on the New Testament list of sins. We've got envy there, right? Which is probably our real problem, envy. Like, I want your body, I'm jealous of your body, I want to do what I can do to have your body. It's not about the food. So that's so good. But as you're talking, I was thinking about just how much shame, right? Like, just and to your point, what do we do to our relationship with the Lord, with our neighbors, when we spend all day long battling the shame over, I didn't get my 10,000 steps in. Oh, I ate this thing. Oh, I ate too much and my gluttonous now. Like, all of the shame is so damaging to those relationships, but also to our purpose, right? Like, no one that's filled with shame is like alive and like, let me go, like, do what God's called me to do. It's like, no, can we hide? Like, let me get this area of my life straight first, is I think what I thought, and what I've talked to, clients of mine are like, no, I just, if I could just get this sorted out, then I can go do like whatever God's telling me to do.
Yeah. We've outsourced our inner wisdom. And, and that's what happens when we outsource our inner wisdom. Like, we go back to these external controls for validation when we don't need it. We're already enough. External controls do not allow acceptance of God's grace. And so whether we're, looking at our watch, and I talk about wearables and trackers and all the things in the book. And, there are times when people use it for good. Like I use my GPS when I'm tracking, when I'm hiking, because, I want to make it back to my car, and we hike in some pretty sketchy places. So when there's, you have to drop a GPS pin to get back. Like that's a great thing, using it for the weather, whatever. Some people use it for heart rate variability, and that can be helpful. Some people use it for sleep. We have to ask ourselves, who is this in service to? What is this in service to? If it's, say, I want to track my sleep to see if I'm getting good sleep, and if I'm not, I want that to be better, because I know that if I sleep well, I connect with others well, I feed myself consistently and adequately. There are ways to use those things, but if we're continuously outsourcing our inner wisdom, then it just doesn't leave room for God's grace of, like, you know what, you didn't have to get all those steps today. It's okay. What's more important? Connecting with that neighbor that's alone, that you've been thinking about, but you didn't have the energy to talk to, or to take a meal, or, and we don't have to do those things either, but like, we really have to think, like, gosh, let me accept the grace of, I'm already enough if there's not a vegetable on my plate. I'm already enough if I didn't get a walk in today. I'm already enough if I don't have an able body and I can't get a walk in today. I'm enough if I can't afford that food list that my pastor suggested that we follow every January. I am enough.
Yeah.
God does not require that from me. But I pray that people do have enough to eat. There are a lot of people in this country that don't have enough to eat. And I think we are one of the few countries that has the food supply that we have, and people choose to refuse it. That's a privilege that, and that's this country, that's diet culture. And we talk so much about, there are a lot of books out there too that, like, kind of talk about, like, your body is good, and let's, and all the things, and wonderful Christian influencers talk about, like, accepting that your body is good. But there's this one nagging thing that doesn't let us believe it. And that's because we have not addressed diet culture in the safe places.
Yeah, agreed for sure. Yeah, I was thinking about how it seems to me there's this phenomena that sometimes diets actually spread in our churches.
Yeah.
Right? Like I've seen OPTAVIA, and I've had lots of people tell me, oh, someone in my church led me to OPTAVIA, or the Gwen Shamblin, her way down workshop, like that, fired through the churches, right?
Yeah.
And and I don't, it sounds like maybe Gwen started off on some sort of intuitive eating track, and then I don't know what happened.
We do not know what happened there. Yeah.
but why do you think that is? Like, why do you think women in the church are clamoring for this type of rescue? And that might be someone listening might be like, that's a really strange way she asked that question, but I really think it's what it is. I think we're looking for rescue, and it hurts my heart. And I was a woman in the church for 30 some odd years before I recognized that a diet wasn't going to be my rescue, that Jesus had to be my only rescue. But why do you think that that's so pervasive?
There's a lot there. There's a lot there. Well, I think we've been raised in many churches to not seek necessarily, this is a big pill to swallow, not necessarily to seek the love of God, sadly, but to seek the approval of man.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
And it is so tied to purity culture, which God didn't ask. God did not ask that of us. Can we, like, revisit the woman at the well, like, every day as a reminder that God never asked that of us? But we're so wrapped up in the appearance and the perfection and the purity of the culture that God never asked from us. And so I think a lot of it has to do, and there's a part in the book that is, like, it was really hard to write. because I've seen it so often where Christian women, and we talked about this in part one a little bit too, like, or where Christian women maybe kind of fall into diet culture, their bodies change, they get divorced, but the opposite happens too, where they're held to earthly standards by partners.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, I've seen that too.
And the harm,
Mm-hmm.
but that's also, and like, this is a whole nother book, but there's also like men in some churches, not all, right, are basically taught to objectify women,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore women are taught to objectify themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're just in this relationships that it's built on your aesthetic, which is heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
Yet this is chapter one. This is one of the stories in chapter one where it's like we are taught from an early age that the male gaze is one of the greatest things we can give, the greatest things we can achieve. And that is not God's message. And I think that's part of it that we have to step away from. And I talk about a really unfortunate story in the book, like several actually, or chapter one, and then there's a chapter where you don't owe anyone a number on a scale, where I talk about seeing this generation through a generation passed down to a daughter who's so deep in her eating disorder because of this. And so that's a really, that's a big pill to swallow, but it's also, once we see it, we can't unsee it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if partners are to, you know, love others like Christ loved the church, I mean, there's some rundown churches in the Bible. Let's talk about it, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
so like we also, we don't owe anybody a shiny, constantly youthful appearance either.
Yeah.
And I think we really have to talk about this objectification piece too. And I talk about how pastors are like, you know, like trophy wife stuff, I'm using my air quotes, like that is not okay. That is not okay. It perpetuates diet culture, not to mention a lot of other things that are really, really harmful. So yeah, we go there. We go to the ugly places because they need to get out of church.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. I interviewed a couple of pastors on the show a couple of years ago, and kind of asked that question. I was like, okay, so what do we do for the men that are, you know, saying / believing these things? Like, well, you know, I heard in church that my wife should try to look good for me. Like, I want her to try to look good for me. Like, I want her to stay a certain size. I want her to look a certain way. Like, that's the way she honors me. You know, all of the language we put around that. And I was so touched by the way these two men answered it. And they answered it actually with a theme that's in your book, and a line or two I put in mine. But they were like, I would just ask the guy, are you defining beauty the way the word does or the way the world does?
Yeah.
And that's it. End of story. Because if you're defining it the way the world does, like, well, you are. Like, that's what your standards are. Like, where's your list? If your list doesn't match up with the way the Bible defines beauty, then that's not a very good list. That's not a God-sanctioned list.
And where's the grace and compassion for, like, if you're, you know, a husband and you have a wife who's struggling in this world, who probably will because she's living in diet culture, where is the grace and compassion offered to this person you love, and some type of understanding or compassion, just acknowledging how hard it is to walk through diet culture and beauty culture and anti-aging culture. Home should be the safe place where you don't have to conform, right? Homes, churches, it should be the safe place where who God made you to be, body change and all, which is like, it is a thing. We are not frozen in time in our prime. You know, let home be the safe place where people are loved for who they are over their lifespans. And that's something I think that, like, we have to have really hard conversations about that, because we all have men, women in the church have all had seeds of doubt and false beliefs planted without our consent. And we have to do our own work so the next generation doesn't carry it.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed. And I think about how hard it is. I'm just picturing a woman listening today who maybe is where I am. Like I spent 20 years, on the diet track, over
Yeah.
exercising, teaching 3 fitness classes a day, and then having a
Yeah.
full-time job and not eating enough to even, for the burn I did in one class, right?
Yeah.
And what that did to my body now that I'm in my late 40s. And going from a place, I know a lot of the clients I coached, had or believed that they had uber control over how their body looked and,
Yeah.
controlling their body with these same behaviors in their 20s and 30s, only to hit the 40s and 50s and have no control, it feels like, anymore at all. All bets are off. And just the hard that
Yeah.
is. And so I have so much compassion if you're listening today and that's where
Yeah.
you're at. Like there's hope. There is great hope.
There
We
is great
can.
hope. There's also grief. And I
Yeah.
think that's something we have to validate,
Yep.
right? Is that there's grief in not getting what diet culture told you could
Right.
have, which is like, if you eat this way and you move this way, then you'll get this. And
Mhm.
like, I was doing a talk on eating disorders for this group, and someone asked me, let's just super engaged. And she was like, well, what do you think about like preference? Like, I prefer to be this size and I feel like that's okay. And I was like, um, the truth is your body doesn't really care what you prefer. Like your body is going to be what your body is. And like I love like you know some of the analogies that have been done around bodies and like dogs. Like I'm kind of like a cocker spaniel. I got the fluffy ears, which my hair, I'm kind of stocky and kind of athletic build, and on the kind of larger side, I'm not a chihuahua. But then we've got the Saint Bernard and we're telling it needs to be a chihuahua. Like we offer like the support of body grace and body diversity to animals that a lot of us really, really love. And we would never think
Yeah.
the Saint Bernard needs to be the King Charles Cavalier.
Right.
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 They're all dogs.
Yeah.
They're all different. And we're like, we respect it. And the thing is, like, weight is beyond our control. And not only is this kind of like we have this predetermined place where our body likes to hang out, but there's so many other variables: medications, illnesses, surgeries, injuries, all kinds of issues, dieting, all these things, like play a role. And body weight is not a behavior. And I think that's something that like we really need to be aware of in the church too, because if we're acting like willpower and praying will get us a different body, like we are not serving God by those messages.
Preach it. Oh, Leslie,
I do
so
like
good.
to preach.
So good. Okay, so your book Feed Yourself is everywhere books are sold.
Yep.
Tell everyone else where they should connect with you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, mostly on the socials, at Leslie Schilling, and also on Facebook, which is Nutrition Leslie, Twitter Nutrition Leslie. But I'm primarily on Instagram at Leslie Schilling. And if people are curious about the audiobook, I read it. So
awesome.
Because some people do ask, like, they like for authors to read their own books. And if you think I'm too Southern, then you should just read it. No.
I think it's nice and gentle that way.
Thank you.
I love it. Well, Leslie, I'll put all the links to everything in the show notes. I so appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching or listening today. I truly hope something today has helped you stop comparing and start living. Bye-bye.